Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Conservation International's People Need Nature discussion series. We're delighted to have you here with us today to talk about Conservation International Hawaii and the aha moment with Ulu Ching, Jana Young, and Aaron Gross. My name is Matt Ramsey, and I have the great pleasure and honor of being the program director at Conservation International's Hawaii program. And before I turn over the mic, I just wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping items to ensure that the virtual session runs smoothly. So upon joining, all attendees are going to be muted and their webcams will be turned off, and this will remain so for the duration of the event. If you have any questions or would like to follow up with some topics, feel free at any time to enter those questions into the questions drop-down menu in the Go-To webinar control panel. Our team behind the scenes will be monitoring that, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can after the discussion. And finally, we're recording today's event, and it'll be shared. The video will be shared on Conservation International's website. And with that, I'd like to get us started with a quick little story. So when I have the opportunity to speak with students at classes, I usually begin by sharing a quick question. And I ask them, if you could manage a marine area, which one of the following people would you listen to? And you can only choose one. Would you listen to the practitioner, the cultural person who has generations of knowledge passed on to them through traditions and through storytelling? Or would you listen to the academic who has perfected years of studies, has the cutting edge technology, and has a stable of PhDs at their disposal? Or would you listen to the commercial fisherman who's on the water each and every single day and relies on the health of the resources for their well-being? So I asked this question to the students, and I asked them by show of hands, which one person would you pick? And for the few kind of first agonizing seconds, the same thing always happens. The students shyly raise their hands and they look around and they kind of lift their hands for whoever they think they should choose. And then every single time somebody pops up and says, why do we have to pick only one? Can we pick all three? And that's the same kind of thought process we all think about, but it rarely actually happens when it comes to decision making for marine matters, not only in Hawaii, but throughout the world. And the reason I share this story is not only to set the stage for our first speaker, but also to highlight the philosophy and the approach for CI Hawaii. So like the world, Hawaii is isolated. We have limited natural resources, and we have a growing population. With the impacts from climate change, we really don't have time to only rely on one approach, one perspective, or one knowledge system. We need to do whatever we can, and we need to bring all of those approaches together. And they all need to be valued equally. So is this the aha moment that the title refers to? Well, it's actually not. The title refers to aha, or Hawaiian cordage, that when woven together, each strand becomes a unified rope. And this rope is extremely strong and way stronger than the individual strand goes. And like this, our next three speakers are going to talk about a very similar approach. They each lead a programmatic area for CI Hawaii, but when woven together, our work with communities, our work with industry, and our work with government come together in a unified approach to return abundance to Hawaii. And to get your blood pumping and to show you a little bit of what we do in Hawaii and so you can meet our team, we're going to play a video for you. Enjoy.
A 1,000 years ago, our ancestors came from the south to settle on one of the most isolated places on Earth, Hawaii. Living on these remote islands taught us how to be one with our natural world. For hundreds of years, we flourished. Our way of life, how we grew our food and cared for our ocean in balance with nature, fully supported nearly 1 million people across the islands. When the first Westerners arrived, they admired and respected what we had achieved. Over time, however, as Western influence took hold, our natural world suffered, and our traditional ways were nearly lost. No longer self-sustaining, today we import over 90% of our food, including half of the fish we need to feed ourselves. It doesn't have to be this way. Our isolation once stimulated innovations in sustainability to survive. We can do it again. The resources we rely on can recover if cared for and respected. Our past is the best guide for our future. Communities across Hawaii are mobilizing. The practices of our ancestors are being revived. Abundance is returning. Together with our partners, Conservation International Hawaii is working across sectors, from community to industry to government, to address Hawaii's complex conservation challenges. We work with communities on the ground and in the water to revitalize traditional practices and care for the ocean. We work with industry to show how smart choices in seafood production and consumption can be a win for everyone, including the ocean. We are assisting the highest levels of government to strengthen and create better policies for conservation and unlock new sources of funding. We are providing emerging leaders with real-world conservation experiences that will help them become tomorrow's ocean champions. And this is just the beginning. We who love Hawaii share a kuleana, a responsibility and a privilege to care for these precious islands. Side by side with our partners, Conservation International Hawaii is rediscovering the path to sustainability that our ancestors once navigated long ago and are showing the world what is possible. We will return to an abundant ocean. Ho'i ke kai mo mona. For us, for those who came before, and for those who will follow. Join us.
Aloha. O wau o Moana Pomaikai ka uluwehi o ka ala Ching, no ke oho kona mai au. My name is Moana Pomaikai ka uluwehi o ka ala Ching. I come from the Ahupua'a of Keoho Kona on the island of Hawaii. I'm the Senior Program Manager for Community-Based Conservation on the Conservation International Hawaii team. A'ohe pau ka ike I ka halau ho'okahi. Not all knowledge comes from a single source. This is one of my favorite olelo no'eau, or Hawaiian proverb, that reminds us that not all great ideas or solutions come from a single place. Rather, they come from the diverse communities that we live in. Communities of all types around the world are calling for and driving change in every facet of our society, including how we mālama or care for our earth. At Conservation International, we know that top-down solutions are not the only approaches that we can utilize to achieve our conservation goals. At CI Hawaii, we embrace, we integrate, we elevate traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge from the beautifully diverse communities of place and practice that we live and work in. And we work to elevate those knowledge systems so that they are included and incorporated into formal management actions here in Hawaii and across the world. Now, the image in this first slide might be one that we're all somewhat familiar with, gathering around in a communal space, listening to a family member or community member share about their place and their resources. It's certainly an image that brings a lot of memories to me, as raised in Kona and sat at the feet of my grandfather and auntie as they sat in similar community meetings where they fought to protect sacred sites, restore our native language, and fight against overdevelopment along our coastlines. Those moments nurtured me when I was small, and they definitely stick with me and drive me today as I find myself sitting in very similar community gatherings, listening to elders and families and other community members share about their place. Now, these community members that we get to work with, they've been living ocean conservation as a way of life for generations. Their actions embody all of the hundreds of years of ancestral and place-based knowledge, and they apply it in their everyday lives when they interact with their ocean resources. Now, we're honored to help perpetuate those practices and that knowledge, and then apply it into our conservation approaches. Next slide, please. So community ocean users and stewards interact with their resources every day, as Matt mentioned. They depend on the ocean's abundance for their own health and survival. So when I think about their intimate connection to place and their resources, I use the 3 R's. Relationship. They have an intimate connection to their place and their resources, developed through years of daily interaction, as well as inherited ancestral knowledge. Second one, reciprocity. So the healthy give and take in that relationship that's forged out of years of that daily interaction. And finally, responsibility. That reciprocal relationship nurtures that sense of kuleana, or responsibility, that drives ocean conservation. Now, in this image, our partners, like this fisherman in this image, they know the status of their ecosystems and species in their place because of those 3 R's. And the knowledge that they produce, hold, and use is a source of their power as ocean managers and stewards of their critical ocean resources. And it's a key component of the adaptive management strategies that we advocate for here in Hawaii. Next slide, please. So in the Hawaii program, we've taken those similar or those same ocean values and principles that live within our own families and communities and applied them in how we support the development of future ocean champions. Our program partnered with a treasured master fisherman and Hawaiian elder from the island of Molokai, Uncle Mac Poi Poi, to co-develop the Mohala na Konohiki program. So through the Mohala na Konohiki program, we integrate traditional Hawaiian management approaches with contemporary tools and techniques to help grow the next generation of ocean protectors. We also partner with community members, state agencies, cultural stewards, researchers, and other NGOs to facilitate the community-based monitoring hui, a collaborative space where all types of marine monitoring methodologies and strategies are brought together and incorporated into formal state monitoring and management efforts. Finally, we also look to surfers and other ocean resource users who bring valuable and unique perspective and action towards ocean conservation. CI's Surf Conservation Partnership is working with members of the Hawaii surfing community and others to establish our first World Surfing Reserve right here in Waikiki. In all of our community-based work, we prioritize elevating and amplifying Indigenous and place-based knowledge, and we advocate for its inclusion in formal policy and decision-making processes and outcomes. We want to see traditional and local knowledge stand side by side with Western science and be recognized with equal merit, because we know a'ohe pau ka'ike I ka halau ho'okahi. Powerful and lasting solutions come not from a single source, but rather they're brought in from the multiple perspectives, practices, experiences, and places that we all live in. Mahalo for taking the time to learn a little bit more about our work in this space. I'm gonna hand it over to Jana, who's gonna lead us into a deeper dive into our work in seafood. Mahalo and aloha.
Mahalo ulu and aloha everyone. My name is Jana Young and I'm the Sustainable Seafood Manager here on the Hawaii team. And I'm here at our Seai Kaimuki office on the island of Oahu. I wanted to start off by asking you all to remember a time when you had an unforgettable meal at a seafood restaurant. Whether it might have been sushi, poke, or mahi-mahi, do you remember if your seafood was caught locally or harvested with responsible fishing practices? Or even had a chef who understood why these details about seafood even matter? Well, if you ate that seafood dish here in Hawaii, it might come to a surprise to you that that seafood traveled thousands of miles just to get to your plate. And in fact, half of the seafood here in Hawaii comes from a foreign source. And though we're surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, we're heavily dependent on all of the food that we need to feed ourselves. And though fishing and seafood is such a huge part of our diverse cultures, our economy, and our cuisine, it can still be very confusing to visitors and residents alike to know the difference between fresh local seafood and imports. And this is due to a lack of branding and transparency in our supply chains. You know, as someone born and raised here, I'm grateful that fishing and hunting has really shaped my own relationship to food. And I've always been concerned about the state's unsustainable reliance on imports. And by importing, we're essentially shifting our money away when we could be supporting our local fishers and our local businesses here. So is it possible to ramp up local seafood production if our fisheries are already being impacted by climate change and development and other stressors? And is it possible to ramp up, or is it possible to fish more and increase our island food security and support local businesses? Well, the answer is absolutely, and there's a golden opportunity. Next slide, please. So this right here is the golden snapper, or ta'ape. It's an abundant fish species brought into Hawaii from the South Pacific in the mid-1950s, which was even a few years before Hawaii became the 50th state. So more than 60 years later, every fisher person I know has caught ta'ape because they're everywhere. And they can be found on every main Hawaiian island. And they are just in massive schools like this picture here. They can be found crowding our reefs and competing with native fish for habitat and food, and they're basically an invasive species here. But the great thing about ta'ape is that they're flavorful, they're super delicious like most snappers are, with moist and flaky white meat. And so we basically teamed up with a set of experienced commercial fishers, culinary rock stars, and marketers to turn this problem into a solution. Next slide, please. So last year, we started to host COVID-safe virtual cooking demonstrations using ta'ape so that people can learn how to cook in the safety and comfort of their own homes. Some of Hawaii's most popular restaurants started to put ta'ape on their menus, which was really great. They were so creative with that. And we started to explore value-added products such as smoked ta'ape dip and fish sauce to really look to extend the shelf life and value for this fishery. We've also done videos, as you see here, and we partnered with our friends at Augmented Island Studios to create CI's first augmented reality experiences. So if you can see here, here's two examples of those augmented reality experiences that include an Instagram game, which is super addicting. And while these events show, how we're integrating ta'ape into our local food scene and really raising awareness of this species, the reality is that we couldn't have done this without a motivated and aligned set of community partners and people who are passionate about the sustainable seafood movement and really who see the value in this. And this is not just an Oahu thing, but we see this as a statewide effort. With the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been a real wake-up call for a lot of us here in Hawaii, and we really wanted to try and work with as many people as possible to collaborate and find local solutions that have win-win-win solutions, such as this one. And what I love about this is that we can support food security issues in Hawaii, we're boosting local economy, and we're ensuring that seafood lovers, without a doubt, are buying local seafood. And on top of this, we're helping the reefs and our fisheries. And though this year's focus is on ta'ape, our longer-term vision is to really build a collective of activated community leaders across Hawaii that understand that, we could pivot from ta'ape and focus on other sustainable food products such as aquaculture. So in closing, I just wanted to remind you that the next time you order seafood at your favorite grocery store or restaurant, I hope that you think about the responsibility that we have as consumers to vote with our dollars. And if you're in Hawaii, choosing a local and sustainable food product like ta'ape could mean the difference between a healthy, balanced ocean and one plagued with invasive species. So thank you for taking the time to be with us, and I'll now pitch it over to Erin.
Thanks, Jana. And aloha, everyone. My name is Erin Gross, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Conservation Policy and Incentives for the Hawaii team. And before I get started, I just wanted to ask everyone who's joined us here today to just channel your inner child for a moment. If I were to ask the child version of you to draw me a picture of the people who take care of nature, what would those people look like? I suspect that you might show me a picture of people in cargo pants and muddy boots, carrying backpacks, shovels, or binoculars, maybe something like what Matt's daughter has drawn in the photo here on the slide. Or other people might show me a picture of people swimming underwater with dolphins or whales, wearing masks and fins and scuba tanks. What I suspect your inner child probably would not show me is a picture of people in suits. Next slide, please. Your inner child probably would not show me women and men in suits sitting in conference rooms or courtrooms, hunched over computers, surrounded by stacks and stacks of documents that don't have pictures of nature in them at all. That is definitely not what I pictured as a child when I said that I wanted to grow up to take care of nature. I thought I might be living in a forest, or wearing camouflage every day, or studying wolf behavior, or discovering new kinds of mosses. I did not think that I would be living behind a laptop, wearing a suit sometimes, studying statutes and case law and administrative rules, and clearing new paths through forests of policy. But as it turns out, people in suits need to take care of nature too. As I got older, I saw that people in suits were often the only ones in the room when important decisions were being made about nature. I went to law school myself so that I could be in those rooms too, so that I could use my voice for nature. Lawyers, judges, policymakers, and government agency leaders, they all have the power to influence what we as people do in our daily lives. Policies and laws define what we as regular citizens think is acceptable behavior, how we define our responsibilities, what our daily practices look like, what choices we can make with our money. But what if we place nature at the center of these definitions? What if we use policies and laws as opportunities to define what we think is acceptable behavior toward nature, to define our responsibilities to nature, to define how nature should be factored into our daily practices and the choices that we make when we spend our money? The truth is that policies and laws are going to be made by people in suits, whether they take nature into consideration or not. Coming to work for the CI Hawaii program gave me the chance to try and help the people in suits and the people in those decision-making rooms see their own unique opportunities to take care of nature and to make it as easy as possible for them to act on those opportunities. But how can one person, or even a small team, keep up with all of the challenges facing nature? They get more complex, they move faster and faster every day. So the CI Hawaii program started thinking, what if we could provide a training ground for young people destined to wear those suits and to be in those decision-making rooms, while at the same time expand our own capacity to de-risk new policy ideas for nature in Hawaii, as well as around the globe. So the result of our little daydream is something that we've been calling the Conservation Policy and Incentives Lab. Next slide, please. So right now, we collaborate with the William S. Richardson School of Law's Environmental Law Program, a wonderful program that I was lucky enough to have shape my own early legal career. And we work with law students and instructors to analyze and research some of Hawaii's most complex conservation challenges. The lab only started a year ago, but we've already got some proven successes. So for example, leaders from the public sector in Hawaii have tapped the lab to explore how climate smart farming and ranching practices might be encouraged in Hawaii to fight climate change, and how ocean tour passengers might contribute financially to marine resource management here. These analyses and others, many reflected here on the slide, have been used to inform local legislation, including 13 bills in front of the Hawaii State Legislature right now. So our theory about the lab is that by identifying complex legal and policy issues early on, by sharing what we learn with decision makers, And by involving the next generation of legal professionals, the Conservation Policy and Incentives Lab can make the best use of limited resources, can generate goodwill among necessary partners, and most importantly, it can save time. With the pace and intensity of the challenges facing nature, we need all hands on deck using all the skill sets we have. If our lab succeeds in bringing the voice of nature into all the rooms where decisions are getting made, maybe it won't be so surprising sometime in the future to picture people taking care of nature wearing suits. So thanks so much for this opportunity to share our work with you, and I will hand it back to Matt.
All right, thanks, Erin, Jana, and Ulu. You know, I get to speak with these amazing women on almost on a daily basis, but every time I hear them, it brings a smile to my face. You know, being born and raised in Hawaii, it gives me great pleasure and pride in being able to participate in a job that positively impacts the island. But probably even more kind of joyful and really satisfying is the fact that our work with CI Hawaii not only contributes to positive impacts in Hawaii, but actually also has global impacts. You know, for instance, Ulu's work with communities is a key role in the development of a global fellowship that will integrate indigenous practices with Western monitoring and Western science. Jana's work with the seafood industry is improving Hawaii, but it's also informing strategies and approaches in Colombia, Brazil, and Costa Rica. And Aaron's work to inform decision makers is having global impact with some of CI's projects that have made the business case for natural climate solutions in Southeast Asia and has really helped to improve impact investors' kind of perceptions and their understanding of opportunities with sustainable freshwater management. You know, and just that's just the start of things. I would love to see everybody's cameras and reactions, but unfortunately we can't at this point. But I do want to, at this time, open the floor to questions and answers, and I'm getting a lot of them. So just wanted to remind everybody, if you have a question or comments or suggestions, go ahead and put it in the questions drop-down feature in your GoToWebinar control panel. And even if we aren't able to address them immediately during this discussion, we'll get back to you over email at a later date. So looks like, let me see the first question here. And I'm gonna pass this one to Jana. Can you quantify how managing ta'ape or other invasive species populations impacts reef health?
That's a really good question. That's something that we're tracking as part of our initiative. You know, we just started our work through a NOAA grant, and so we're using NOAA's support to be able to pull together data from the Division of Aquatic Resources to really work with them on our efforts and what impacts we're having on the reefs. So yeah, like we're measuring commercial marine landings data and all of that. So something we're tracking as part of our work. That's a good question though.
That's a great question. And on a similar thread, there's a question about the Instagram filter or the augmented reality. If people wanted to participate or try out that activity, how would they get to it?
Yeah, so we have the link that directs you to our CI Hawaii Instagram page. So if you have a mobile device, you can go and click on that link and it'll take you to our CI Hawaii Instagram where you'll be able to play that filter game. And basically you have 30 seconds to eat all the ta'ape that come across your screen. And so far the highest score that I've seen is 32. So I challenge you guys to beat my high score.
And believe me, that is quite a challenge because I've played it lots and haven't even come close. The next question is, let me read it off because it's a long one. With a 45% decline in the biomass of important fish species in West Hawaii over the last 10 years, how sustainable are current local fishing practices, particularly with no required fishing license and very little enforcement? Is the larger problem more or less about the type and size of fish being fished, or the overall amount of fish left on our reefs versus demand in general? And I'm looking at the three of our amazing women here. Does anybody want to field that question?
I
I
feel
can see
like
they're all
you're
looking for the
the one who,
unmute.
oh, sorry, Matt. I feel like you're the one who's best placed to answer that because it's a pretty holistic question. But ladies.
It is, yeah, it is a very holistic question, and it kind of speaks to our three pillars. I mean, there's tremendous opportunity to improve the way our fisheries are managed, like the participant mentioned, with the lack of a fishing license. Without the very basic data about who is fishing, how much fish are being removed from the reef, it's really hard to make informed decisions when it comes to marine management. So that's a perfect example of the work that Aaron and her lab did, which did a feasibility study on a fishing license registry, um, or
Permit.
study permit for Hawaii. Also the other question is about the size of fish or the type of fish that's being removed, and that does mean there's no doubt that the amount of fish that are being pulled out needs to be addressed. But the question is by how much? We don't know. There are in-water surveys that are done that gives us a kind of a general picture of the fish populations that are out there. But without those other management tools in place, it's really hard to quantify how much is too much, how little is too little. There's some excellent kind of initiatives going on with the state government as far as herbivores and different management strategies such as place-based management or community-based management. Um, and and I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth over there. But it's a very, very tricky question. Thanks for answering that.
Can I add
Yeah,
in
go ahead, Lulu.
just another thought? Our close work on the ground in communities also helps us to identify other pressures on the resources that aren't the result of extraction or fishing. West Hawaii is also seeing extreme increases in coastal development, over the last several decades. And so when we work within communities of place and industry, we can better understand what other stressors are present and have a big impact on the health of these coastal ecosystems. And that's important to our community members who are fishers and do practice and utilize traditional knowledge and practices in their harvest activities. Because we don't want to isolate or point fingers in any one area. We look at it from that holistic perspective, as Matt mentioned. So mahalo for just a thought.
The next question, and I'll throw this one to Jana again. I saw Mark Noguchi on the video, aka Gooch. Does he work with the Ta'ape program?
Yeah, I'm so stoked that people recognize him because he's one of our longtime partners and thought leaders in driving the Chef Hui, which is a organization that CI Hawaii is closely partnering with our initiative. And Gooch has been a huge supporter of Ta'ape, and in the slide that I showed, it showed the virtual cooking demo. So if you guys want, you can see the cooking demonstrations that he's been on with us, all on the Chef Hui website. So I will be putting the link in the chat box. Yeah, he actually just did another one this past weekend using Ta'ape with the Hawaii Contemporary, which is a art summit here in Hawaii, where he made a really tasty smoked Ta'ape fish dip with a charcuterie board. So it's always entertaining and great to work with him. So I'm stoked people recognize.
Thanks, Jana. From Catherine, I love the goal of keeping Hawaii's oceans abundant. What are the top priorities/strategies in the next year or two to support this goal? So I'm gonna ask Jana, Ulu, and Aaron to mention one each.
I'll go first.
Oh,
Oh,
do you want
Go
to
ahead, Ulu. Go ahead, Ulu.
okay. From where I sit, a strategy has to be um, involving our folks on the ground, our communities who are impacted the most, families and individuals, commercial fishermen, families who depend on ocean resources every day, to involve them at every level of decision making, and empower them and create the opportunities or help to maneuver through the opportunities for that participation. I think that's really important. We have to give voice and power to the people, and I think that that's a long-term sustainable strategy, given that these are the people who are going to be in place for the rest of their lives and for the rest of their kids and grandkids' lives. So for me, that's a critical strategy.
I'll also echo that with Ulu, and part of our work in sustainable seafood that I mentioned really activates the culinary and the fishing communities, and it really just boils down to the people. And like I said, we couldn't do this without the community support and the acknowledgement that this movement is valuable, not only to support our local economy, but for our fishing community as well. So it really boils down to people and who we're creating this space to collaborate with. So yeah, mahalo ulu.
My turn. I think that with the challenges that we've seen in the last year with COVID and the pandemic and the effects that it's had on the economy everywhere, but particularly here in Hawaii, finding ways to help people invest in the natural assets that really are the foundation of what makes Hawaii Hawaii and what makes the places that people are so connected to important to them. Sustainable funding strategies for the management activities and for the stewardship practices that need to be sustained over the long term, like Ulu mentioned, by families, by management agencies, by all kinds of people who have an interest in stewarding the resources, but are challenged right now in trying to figure out how to not have to choose between economic prosperity and natural abundance. And so I think helping both people at the community level as well as people at the government level see those paths forward where you can find solutions that help us position ourselves to where we want to be on the other side of these challenges, and not make short-sighted decisions that sort of put us back when we get to the other side of this from where we want to be. So the lab has been working on some studies to try and help identify opportunities in local policy to help people who are helping with food security. It ties also to Jana's work with the Seafood Initiative to try and help people who are producing the food here and in many ways are reducing the carbon footprint because things aren't needing to be shipped in here, and are helping with food security to help them make it and to give them other ways to value the work that they're doing for the community. And also giving people who are in the tourism industry mechanisms to allow their businesses to support the resources in a very direct way when everyone recovers from the immediate constraints that we have. So I think finding those pathways and those opportunities where there's win-wins for everybody are a huge priority for us and for everyone here, I think.
Great, thanks, Erin. And this one, I'm gonna pitch to both Ulu and Jana because cultivation happens on different levels. So the question is, what other fish besides ta'ape are being cultivated in Hawaii? So if Ulu, you could mention the traditional fish pond approach, and Jana, if you want to mention the more modern cages or land-based aquaculture projects.
Great, thanks. I had to kind of makavalu or define in my head what we meant by cultivate, what's being cultivated. Mahalo. Well, so, you know, it's an honor and privilege to work within every one of these communities. And in particular, one of our partners in the South Kona Kapalilua plain on Hawaii Island, where, and that region in general, still really utilizes traditional management practices within their opelu fisheries or their mackerel scad fisheries. And it's a very important cultural as well as economic species. And the traditions around caring for the natural fish aggregation sites and fish feeding sites is one that dates back hundreds of years, and it continues today. So fishermen who have been fishing their entire lives, learning from their families, fathers, uncles, grandfathers, still go out and do the same caring of those natural aggregation sites and feeding, essentially feeding those ko'a or those natural aggregation sites, such that those fish come back to them generation after generation. The fish come back to them, and there's a sustainable harvest. There's a harvest of the appropriate size and amount during the appropriate time of the year for those fish. So it's considered a very sustainable fishing practice, and it's totally the result of sorry, text message there. Totally a result of the traditional management practices that have been employed for generations. That's something, or that's those are communities that we've partnered with, and we look to continue to perpetuate those practices, but see what we can also learn from them and how they can be connected into Jana's work in terms of that sustainable seafood supply chain, and how to bring economic benefit to those traditional fishers and community fishers, as well as maintain healthy opelu fisheries. Mahalo.
Yeah, and I'll just say that on the modern aquaculture effort side, using cages, we know of folks on Hawaii Island and Oahu cultivating kona kampachi, which is a high-end yellowtail, also tilapia, and newer efforts have been talking about doing offshore aquaculture for nenui, moi, and limu off of Oahu. So there's a lot of kind of really good energy around supporting sustainable aquaculture efforts that use modern practices like cages, like Matt talked about. So it's exciting. There's a lot of stuff being done in this space.
Great, thanks, Jana and Ulu. The next question, this is a very timely question because the state of Hawaii legislature is actually in session now. Has there been any recent legislative action that CI has pursued which will make a large impact on ocean health? And I'll toss this one to Aaron and narrow the scope a little bit and focus it on Hawaii.
Yeah, so it's tricky, you know, the work that we do in the lab is to try and inform the decision makers. And like I said in my section, you know, we try and make it as easy as possible for them to act on opportunities. So we've provided different studies to people who are in a position to act and to pursue that legislation. So CI isn't pushing the legislation, but others who are interested and excited about an opportunity are the ones who end up actually pushing it. But an example, I think one of the greatest examples of impact in Hawaii and potentially impact for the approach to dealing with a difficult issue was the non-commercial marine fishing registry permit and license feasibility study that Matt mentioned. Is kind of a mouthful. But that took a really unique approach to trying to address something that has been a really divisive issue for a really long time. Non-commercial fishing has been a very open practice. You didn't need a license. You didn't need to tell anyone you were going out. You don't need to do any of those things. But as Matt mentioned, that creates some data gaps in who's doing what, what's being taken, how much is being taken, all of that. You also don't know how to reach out to the fishers who might be interested or who might be impacted in future changes to regulation. So there was a communication difficulty. And so, you know, the reason I think that had such a huge impact is that we were able to bring together parties who normally would be on the opposite side of this issue, sort of shouting at each other. You would have fishers who were very worried about their ability to fish and their ability to sort of provide home sustenance to their families being jeopardized. You had indigenous fishers who were worried that their practices, like the practices that Ulu's talking about, would be jeopardized. You had the marine resource managers who were struggling to make good decisions with really limited data. And you had conservationists like CI's, you know, the side of conservation folks in there as well. And so the reason I think it had a big impact is that we were able to bring this group together to talk about these issues together and figure out what we agreed on and where there were places of alignment that could be a path forward to creating a better situation for everyone. And that group had maintained a good working relationship for over 3 years. And we still reach out to each other for things where we have issues of alignment that work out as well. So building that ability to work on big, complex problems together across traditionally divisive lines, I think that was a really good example. We're also, we did a study last year to try and help the Division of Aquatic Resources try and understand how they could make a connection between the ocean tourism businesses and the ocean tourism economy that relies so much on the marine resources that that agency takes care of. There's right now no way for those businesses to contribute directly to that marine management. And so looking at those sustainable funding opportunities, how do you address those disconnects between the business activities that are benefiting from and would benefit from good management over the long term and the agencies that are responsible for doing that work? So I'm sorry, that's a really long answer, but those, I think that those are some examples.
Yeah, and I mean, there's bills right now in the current legislature that talk about conservation finance to help out just conservation in general, as well as ocean conservation. And there's bills that will, if they get passed, will really help out with marine management as far as licensing or different permitting issues. So there's quite a number of bills that we're kind of contributing to, and we'll be happy to send out those details to everybody. But unfortunately, we're out of time right now. And on behalf of the CI Hawaii team and everyone here at Conservation International, I just wanted to say mahalo for taking the time to join us today and submitting your questions and just learning a little bit more about CI Hawaii. We'll be following up with each and every one of you via email, and we'll be sending you a link of today's session along with a survey so that we can learn a little bit more about your experience today. Please feel free to share the recording with your friends and family. And mahalo for your time. Aloha. And as we say in Hawaii, ahui ho, or until we meet again. Aloha.
Mahalo.
Aloha. Mahalo.